Welcome. If you seek truth, the truth shall set you free. Fear not. And now the agenda with Crystal Risotti.
Hi, and welcome to the Agenda with Crystal Risotti. I'm the host, Crystal, and I want to thank you for joining in today for this podcast. We're going to, some point, I swear we're going to get to something fun to talk about, but there's just so much that's on my mind about things that are going on in current events and with Bible prophecy alignment that I feel like it's important to talk about at this point in time. And eventually, hopefully, we can get to some more fun topics, but it's necessary for us to get through this to begin with. So this week's topic is going to be about economic globalism, and we're going to dive a little bit more into the UN and some of the offshoots of that, like the World Economic Forum. You might remember in the last episode that we discussed a lot about the UN and communist goals that were read into the congressional record in the U.S. in the 1960s, and what the difference is in the philosophy between globalism versus sovereignty in the U.S. and why that's important. So this week, I want to kind of recap that a little bit. So in America, the country was built on individual responsibility, individual freedom, and individual rights. Our ancestors fled the tyranny of England to get away from it, and they wanted to ensure that our rights granted by God, not anyone else, were protected and that no one could take them away. On the flip side, globalists have the opposite agenda. Globalists are all about a one world government. They don't like sovereignty in countries. You've heard the term New World Order, That is also a globalist agenda item. They are seeking to bring that to pass. It's talking about like united countries instead of sovereign countries and having one world leader overall. So, Josh, if you can go to slide 1. This is the reason for the UN and all of its tentacles, and we talked about this in the last episode a little bit, so I won't go into a great detail about it. I just want you to recognize all of these entities that are actually aligned with the United Nations. We're talking the World Economic Forum, we're talking the World Health Organization, we're talking UNICEF, we're talking the World Wildlife Foundation, the International Monetary Fund. So I just kind of want you to see all of these different entities again to refresh your memory about how integrated it all is. And you can take it down. Thanks, Josh. One thing that I often tell people is when you start doing research about these things, it's almost like you need to be a detective and put all these things on a board and you've got the yarn connecting them all, because a lot of them are called by different names and all these different little organizations pop up frequently, but they're all the same entity behind the scenes. They're all related. They're just put out into the public in a different format. So it's something that's interesting. The Bible informs us of a coming time when there will be a one world government and there will be one leader, and we refer to him as the Antichrist. In Revelation 17:12 through 14, the Bible tells us the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive royal authority as kings for 1 hour, together with the beast. Verse 13, these are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, Lamb being Jesus. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and fruitful and faithful. So this is happening during the tribulation period. That's what this is talking about. And one thing that we need to note is that we have so many things going on right now in our culture in a format where they're all occurring at the same time, leading us up to that time. We're not there yet, but there's some interesting things we're going to talk about tonight in regards to the United Nations and the economic globalism side of things that will blow your mind, I think. So bear with me and we'll go through this together. The beast in that scenario is obviously Satan, and he gives power to the 10 kings. And these kings rule over the earth, but at the direction of him. That's the true one world government. So a lot of people don't understand why Christians are against the New World Order and the one world government. And part of that is because we're trying to ensure that that time doesn't come yet. Because when that time comes, very few people will have the ability to then trust Christ as their Savior and become saved. So our goal as Christians is usually to tarry, like to make sure that things don't get to the point where it's too late for people. And so that's one of the reasons that we're really behind that. The Bible goes on to speak about the mark of the beast, and there's been so much speculation about that, but we know that there will be an inability to buy or sell without it. You cannot buy or sell without it. There is going to be a war on Christians as well. The Bible talks about that. Many of us may already know about the prophecies, but I think it's important to remind ourselves of that, because when we start going through this actual content, it's going to align, and you're going to see that. So in the podcast today, we're going to talk about several things that are already in place, ready for these prophecies to take form. In the last episode, we talked about the UN again and communist goals. Now we're going to dive into the globalist economy and the economic events that are going on right now. So with slide 2, Josh, if you wouldn't mind putting that up. We talked about this in the last podcast. These are the global 17 sustainability goals from the United Nations. And the interesting thing that I think is going to become very clear about these in this show is you're going to see how they're cross-pollinating all of these. So they look like 17 separate goals, but they're really not. And you're going to be surprised at some of the things that they're cross-pollinating, because they don't logically make sense to go together. But because they're putting them together, that's how we know these are all related. Okay, so that's pushing us into the New World Order and one world government. We talked a little bit about the ESG scores for companies that they're embracing on a worldwide scale right now. That's environmental, social governance. So ESG stands for that. Let's talk a little bit about each one of those. Environmental equals sustainability. We hear the term sustainability all the time. That's being pushed on us by the climate change embracers. And that is all part of this UN agenda. The social aspect, you may have heard about DEI. That's also being not only embraced in companies, but pushed on our kids in schools. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, or as I like to refer to it, diversity, inclusion, and equity, because I like DIE better than DEI. I think that's more accurate. But they're talking about philanthropic efforts when they talk about that, gender and wage equality, stakeholders, including investors, employees, customers, suppliers, etc. So this DEI or DIE type of thing is infiltrating everything. And I believe that it started as a financial endeavor. And because companies were embracing it, the schools started to embrace it, because what is the school's main job? To prepare kids for the workplace and to be adults. So I think the reason we're seeing it in schools is because it came through the corporate side of things first. I heard about it at my work first before I ever heard about it in schools. And so it just kind of trickled down. And I believe we have to keep in mind the people that are doing these things, they are not bad people. They don't have bad intent, at least not consciously. I don't believe. They believe they're doing virtuous things by implementing these things, because they don't have discernment, because they don't know prophecy, because they don't see the bad side of it. They don't have a moral foundation to work from like we do as Christians. So they make up their own, basically. So that's kind of something that we have to keep in mind when we're talking to these people, because they absolutely believe they're doing the right thing. They do. And it sounds bad when we say you're not. What's wrong with inclusiveness? What's wrong with it? Well, I'll tell you something. Every time I've seen that pushed, it's always exclusive to somebody else. To have inclusion, you can't have 100% inclusion because you can't have 100% agreement on anything. So when you say inclusion and you're inclusive, you're actually excluding somebody at the same time because you won't have buy-in from everybody. What's wrong with the diversity aspect? There is absolutely nothing wrong with diversity as a moral standard. There is something wrong when it's pushed on everyone and the way that they're doing it. When they force diversity hires over other hires. And if you look at it, the diversity aspect always seems to deal with people of color. It's always targeted at people of color. Who does that leave out? Again, your inclusiveness is excluding others. I can tell you that because my work had ESG scoring and we had ERGs, employee resource groups. We had an employee resource group, I think I mentioned this in the last show, for everybody except one thing, and that was white males. We had one for African Americans. We had one for Latinos and Latinas. We had the Asian group. We had the gay pride group. We had all these groups, but the one thing we didn't have a group for was white males. So again, your inclusivity is excluding somebody. So, and then the social aspect. I don't mind people wanting you to have respect for others, for example. Where it becomes an issue, especially in schools, is when your disagreement with someone turns into you're not being respectful of them. And that's socially unacceptable. So there are always going to be people we don't agree with on something. And the whole thing behind the social aspect that they push in the schools, I know because I've been to the events where they're training the teachers in this state about how to incorporate it in, is exactly that. Respect for others. But respect for others in their mind turns into, well, if Johnny wants to go by Julie and use she, her pronouns, and you don't respect that, you're wrong. So we have to be very careful with these things because the enemy is very subtle on how these things are being rolled out. And then the governance part of the ESG, that means oversight and enforcement. So that in and of itself should put chills down your spine. Whenever there's government and enforcement involved, someone has made the decision of what's right, and someone has made the decision that you're wrong if you don't go along with it. And in those cases where there's ESG, the governance side of things, you will be punished if you don't go along with it. I promise you. Now, on a corporate level, it's more about they have to demonstrate how they're enforcing it within the company through policies and procedures. It's not really punitive on a personal scale, but in a school situation, for example, it can be. They can punish these kids for not going along with what they say. Let's go to slide 3. I want to talk a little bit about environmentalism and what does that actually mean. Sometimes we assume we know things, and I just think it's important to get back to basics and go back to what is the root of this, the source. So in this case, this is from Wikipedia, so, it's open source. Can't depend a lot on that, but for this, I think it's accurate. Environmentalism or environmental rights is a broad philosophy, ideology, and social movement. Let's stop right there. Because I keep saying there are people in the climate change movement that it's a cult. It's a religion to them. They've elevated it above everything else. It becomes their idol. And this right here is talking about philosophy, ideology, and social movement. And when you're talking ideology, that is something that's ingrained in someone that they embrace so much they would die on a hill for it. philosophy, that's our mindset, right? So that's really what environmentalism is about. Can we go back to the slide? It goes on to say those things about supporting life, habitats, and surroundings. While environmentalism focuses more on the environmental and nature-related aspects of green ideology and politics, that's important to note. I can't even say it. Ecologism combines the ideology of social ecology and environmentalism. I'll just stop there. I want to go back to the green ideology and politics statement there. And we're talking about, again, ideology, something that somebody embraces and it becomes natural to them. They internalize it, and it's just a way of their thinking. And then you throw politics in with it. Well, we're seeing that all over the place. These people have embraced this as a religion of sorts. And I didn't do it in this episode, but if you go back and look at the definition of religion, because it's easy to say, oh, you're just crazy. You're just writing this off as a religion. You don't know what you're talking about. Go back and read what the definition of a religion is, and then tell me this isn't a religion. And I will tell you that it aligns also with the scriptures where they talk about people will worship the creation instead of the creator. That's also a sign of the end times. We're there, guys. And let's go to slide 4. I want to talk a little bit about how the ESG scores are done. And this is from also Wikipedia. ESG scores are generated by rating platforms where analysts evaluate corporate disclosures, conduct management interviews, and review publicly available information about an organization to provide an objective rating of the organization's performance. Here's the important part I want to talk about. The term ESG was popularly used first in a 2000 report titled Who Cares Wins, which was a joint initiative of financial institutions at the invitation of the UN. This all goes back to the UN. They're derived from weighting ESG liabilities across a wide range of issues, taking into account sector-specific factors. The rating agencies are third-party companies that create ESG scoring systems, and each agency has a unique methodology and set of criteria for evaluating companies. Now, I can tell you from experience, this has been around for quite a while. It's not something new. We're just starting to hear about it. I worked for a company that was a global company, and we had a town hall, and I actually asked the question anonymously, are we doing ESG scoring? And it was ironic because I didn't know we were at the time. Just some of the things that were being said in a town hall triggered it in my mind. The very next town hall, there was a whole segment of presentation on how we were doing ESG scores. So I was right. We were doing them. We were participating in them. The thing that is forcing it in the corporate environment, though, is that we have all these investment corporations and investment companies, and the investment companies are actually part of the UN also. There's an organization within the UN where these guys go and meet. They're the ones that decided they were going to basically tell corporate organizations that they would not lend to them unless they are participating in ESG and they're doing reporting on it. And then they get a score as a corporation based on how they treat the environment. So the sustainability aspect, how are they recycling things? How are they on the emissions? And so on and so forth. And so the higher score they get, the more likely they are to get funding and investments. And then that goes hand in hand with the stock market, because those funding and investments also incorporate in the stock market. So it's this whole monster entity with tentacles everywhere, and it all goes back to the UN. They also say it's voluntary, but just like the other things that have happened in the recent past, and I won't go into detail on that, there's always they always do it that way. They'll do coercion instead of mandates. We had the situation where do this or you lose your job. And the argument that they have is, well, you're still free to choose. You still have freedom of choice. Nobody's ordering you to do it. But you're in a position where you're going to lose your job if you don't. So that is coercion, which is actually a crime. I will just say that. Let's go to slide 5. Increasingly, management teams at public companies are being required by stock markets and government bodies to provide ESG disclosure with their quarterly and annual reporting. I'm going to jump down to the last paragraph where it says stakeholders and rating agencies interested in producing ESG scores will review these company or fund disclosures, then conduct managerial reviews, compare results and metrics to other companies in the industry, and present an ESG score for the company. So in order for that all to happen, somebody is in charge. Somebody is saying what those ESG scores should be, right? It didn't just, it's not frivolous. You can't just say, oh, I'm ESG compliant. No, somebody is setting those standards. Somebody is saying this is what needs to happen. And these companies are being graded accordingly and assigned a score. So you have to look past the obvious and figure out, where is that coming from? Who is the elitist that thinks they know everything and that these companies are just falling in line with? Somebody's pulling the strings. The last statistic I could pull was 28% of large cap companies in the S&P 500 published reports in 2022. So just under a third of all companies worldwide that are in the S&P 500 are participating in this. The funny thing is, do you ever hear about it really? How do you know a company's participating? They don't wear it like a badge. They don't really talk to you if you're interviewing for a job and tell you, by the way, we're ESG compliant. This is our score. That's not something that comes up. So it's oftentimes done on a stealth level behind the scenes. And you have to dig in to figure it out. That information was according to the GNA Institute, by the way. I did see some news that broke last week that I want to talk about briefly. JP Morgan Chase and BlackRock/State Street Global Advisors, those are huge investment companies. Like BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard are the top 3, I believe. They dropped out of the UN Climate Alliance. Now, when I was reading this article, I thought, they were in the Climate Alliance and they're investment companies. What's the connection there? And remember what I said in the beginning, all those sustainability goals are really linked together. You just don't know it. This is one of those occasions. There's, I believe, over 100 investor groups that are part of the UN Climate Alliance. They're financial, but they're part of a climate alliance. Why is that? Their intention was laid out. They have, and we talked about last time, we have the 17 sustainability goals, but there's over 160 targets underneath those sustainability goals that break them down into a more granular level to explain how they're going to do it. So this climate alliance, they have 4 goals, so I'm going to talk through those. Target 13.1 is to strengthen resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related hazards and natural disasters in all countries. Again, we're talking financial investment organizations. We're not talking climatologists or scientists or meteorologists. We're talking investment companies, over 100 of them as part of this UN Climate Alliance. What does that have to do with how are they going to strengthen resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related hazards? Think about that. We'll talk more about it in a minute. Their second target 13.2, integrate climate change measures into national policies. strategies, and planning. So that tells us how they're involved. They're highly involved in governance and governments across the world. They're pulling the strings behind the scenes to get policies in place in these countries to adhere to this climate agenda, the climate change agenda. Isn't that interesting? So we think the governments are running things, and are they? And then again, who are these investment companies representing? The United Nations. The next target 13.3, improve education, awareness raising, and human and institutional capacity on climate change mitigation, adaptation, impact reduction, and early warning. So now we've got them involved in education. We've got them involved in marketing and advertising because their job is to raise awareness and human institutional capacity on mitigation, adaptation, impact reduction, and early warning. The tentacles are spreading and growing. The next target, 13.A, implement the commitment undertaken by developed country parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to a goal of mobilizing jointly $100 billion annually by 2020 from all sources to address the needs of developing countries in the context of meaningful mitigation actions and transparency, on and on and on. It's a really long run-on sentence. But yeah, so we're talking about this United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Have you ever heard of that? Probably not. That's another thing with all these different entities related to the UN. They're always having functions. They're always having events or conventions or things like that. And that's never in the news. So in order to even know about it, you kind of have to dig in and follow it, which is where I hope I'm helping you all. I'll do it on your behalf. So they're talking about developed countries that are going to contribute $100 billion annually. And this was by 2020. So this has already been accomplished at this point from all sources to address the needs of developing countries. What is that? Distribution of wealth. That's Marxism. Take from those who have and give to those who don't. This is on a global scale. We're taking from countries that have and giving it to countries who don't. I'm telling you, all the things that are going on right now, especially with the migration policies, our border in the U.S. and the jacked up mess that is. Now I'm seeing it's in Canada too, on the northern border. Other countries have had infiltrations of migrants coming in from all over. This is part of an initiative they're pushing, because how do you get a country that is so prosperous to be more equitable to those who don't have as much? One of the most brilliant ways to do that is to let them all flood into the country. I just heard a statistic today that we now have more migrants who have come across the border than the population that exists in 36 states in the U.S. Imagine that. The amount of migrants who have come over top the population of 36 states. We only have 50. Before long, there will be more and more. And again, I'm going to say this again. I said this in the first episode. I am not against legal immigrants coming to the country the right way. And I also think there are issues with our immigration policy that makes it very difficult for people to follow the immigration policy. There's a lot of money involved that these people have to come here and then pay our government to stay here. That is a major issue to me. But I am not ever going to support illegal immigration. Never. There is a reason we have legal versus illegal. There's a vetting process that goes on with the legal immigrants coming to this country that does not go on with the illegals. So there's that. Part of that also was to operationalize the Green Climate Fund. Have you ever heard of that? That's an interesting little title there. Through its capitalization as soon as possible. There's an urgency that they listed in that target. There's one more target we're going to talk about, and that's Target 13B. Promote mechanisms for raising capacity for effective climate change-related planning and management in least developed countries and small island developing states, including, here's the things, focusing on women, youth, and local and marginalized communities. So again, the focus is on take from the haves and give to the have-nots. All right. They try to make that sound so virtuous, but let's break that down for a minute. If I want to help someone who's less fortunate, that's virtuous. If you're forcing me to do it, there's no virtue in that. There's no virtue on my part. You're taking it from me and I'm giving it to them. That's not charity. That's not me giving with a grateful heart to anyone. That's someone forcing me to do it. And it takes all of the virtue out of it. But yet they promote it as being so virtuous. I want to step back for a minute to the JP Morgan Chase and BlackRock and State Street dropping out of the UN Climate Alliance. At first, I thought that was a great thing. I thought it was interesting, and I thought maybe, there's a shift going on. These funding organizations are realizing the stupidity of it, so they're getting out. But no, hold on. When I researched it further, JP Morgan Chase actually dropped out because they feel that their internal group targeting climate issues is more efficient and functional than what this organization was providing. So it was an arrogance. That was the reason they dropped out. They're still going to forge forward with it. They just have built up their internal group that handles it so well, they think that it's better than what this UN Climate Alliance can provide. And then BlackRock felt that the requirements were too stringent, and that's why they dropped out. But they're also still pursuing it internally. So they've assured everyone we're still going forward with the agenda. We're just not going to be part of the UN's Climate Alliance. So don't let that fool you. People are so sneaky sometimes. Let's go to slide 6. This is going to be something that I'm just going to point out to you because this goes back to all of these sustainability goals being connected. I want you to see, this was an article on the United Nations website itself. It says parties will decide the future of the gender agenda in the UN climate change process this year. Again, how are those connected? It doesn't make any sense. Let's go to slide 7. There's actually an organization called an initiative called the Lima Work Program on Gender. And I found this article also on the UN's website where they're saying, in line with the COP28 decision on gender, parties are preparing to undertake a comprehensive review of the implementation of the enhanced Lima Work Program on Gender and its Gender Action Plan. The review process will start during the Bonn Climate Change Conference in June 2024, with the aim of identifying progress, challenges, gaps, and priorities in the implementation of the work program and its action plan. So I thought, I don't understand this. So I start looking into the Lima Work Program on Gender. And so I find this article also states the Enhanced Lima Work Program on Gender and its Gender Action Plan fostered progress in key areas to promote women's empowerment and gender equality, both in the climate decision-making process and in the implementation of gender-responsive climate action. So they're using this Lima program on climate change, and they're linking it to the gender side of things by stating that they want more women to be leaders in this climate change initiative. And that's how they're linking the two. I'm telling you, it's all linked behind the scenes. Let's talk a little bit now about social credit scores. We touched on that before. They're kind of a follow-up to the ESG scores. So the ESG scores were implemented in corporate settings for companies. The social credit scores are actually on individuals. And so I think this is really important to talk about because China's already doing it. Britain's already doing it. U.S. is late to the party. We tend to, I don't know, I think when the country was first formed, we were very sovereign. We didn't want to do what everybody else did on purpose because we saw as a country the failings of all the countries around. And the U.S. was founded purposefully as a rebellious nation because we didn't want to participate in it because we saw all the failures. Now, time has evolved and it's come to the point where the U.S. now wants to be aligned with everyone else. So a complete flip-flop. It's just that we're late to the party. We take a little longer to join into these cultural changes that are going on. Let's put slide 8 up. I want to talk about what are these social credit scores and what do they do. So the social credit score is assigned to individuals by the government. So again, government's God in this case, and they rate people on their behaviors based on the climate change agenda. And if you have a good score, then you can do all these things like access to social services or loans or luxury hotels, insurance, travel abroad, better schools, planes and high-speed train travel. If you don't have a good social credit score, guess what? You're restricted on all of these things. But don't worry, because in China right now, they're basing it on carbon credits. So you're assigned so many credits to start with. And as long as you're a good little boy or girl, you can continue your lifestyle and continue to do all these things. But if you screw up and you emit a little too much carbon, or you travel a little too far, you're allowed to drive 15 miles from your house every day, and you go 20, you lose some carbon credits. And then that restricts you to all these other things. Again, you're still free. They'll say that. You're still free. You have choices you can make. It's your choice. If you do something wrong, that was your choice. You just have consequences to it. But it's not like you can't still choose to do what you want, right? And how many times are we seeing that go on in society? Other countries, again, are already implementing this social credit score, and U.S. is late to the party, but rest assured it's coming. China introduced the system in 2013. We're in 2024. How long ago was that? When did we start hearing about this? I didn't start hearing about this until the past couple years. It's been very much under wraps. They've kept it very close to their chest and have not released much about this at all. And our media is complicit in it. China's social credit system, it's a combination of government and business surveillance. They have facial recognition software all over China now. Really good facial recognition software. Really good technology, very precise. And they follow people. The AI systems follow people as they walk around the streets, as they're doing their daily business. They're constantly watching. They're also, if you do a violation, blasting it on TV screens around town, putting your face on there and your transgression. So it's shaming you and everybody knows about it. It's very Orwellian. Again, government and business. So we talked about that a little bit before, the public-private partnership stuff. This is an example of that, I believe. Government is restricted on things they can do, but if they can get a private entity to do it, there's a lot more freedom that way. And then they partner together. And there's you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. There's quid pro quo between the two of them. They work out like a little contract deal, and then they just move forward with it. Scary stuff. Given the position of several major American companies, a similar system is going to be coming here sooner than you think. And there's an article called Coming Soon, America's Own Social Credit System by The Hill. And if you'll pull up slide 9, we'll read a little bit of that. China's social credit system, I started to say secret, it kind of is a combination of government and business surveillance that gives citizens a score that can restrict the ability of individuals to take action, such as purchasing plane tickets, acquiring property, or taking loans because of behaviors. Given the position of several major American companies, a similar system may be coming here sooner than you think. So this has already been published. Go to slide 10. Last week, PayPal announced a partnership with the left-wing Southern Poverty Law Center. By the way, the SPLC is extremely leftist and slanted, but they were partnered up to investigate the role of white supremacists and the propagators of anti-government rhetoric, subjective labels that potentially could impact a large number of groups or people using their service. PayPal says the collected information will be shared with other financial firms and politicians. Facebook is taking similar measures, recently introducing messages that ask users to snitch on their potentially extremist friends, which, considering the platform's bias, seems mainly to target the political right. At the same time, Facebook and Microsoft are working with several other web giants in the UN on a database to block potential extremist content. And there you have it. So again, the UN is behind this. Let's go to slide 11 and read a little bit more. Federal fingerprints aren't directly on recent actions yet. The creation of a digital dollar, again, the financial system, would put an exclamation point on a new social credit score. Working in conjunction with major tech companies, citizens not convicted of a crime could lose their ability to transact any business. In time, decentralized forms of money, such as cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, may be the main means for dissidents to operate, as long as the federal government doesn't move to squash them. If the Fed and members of Congress are skeptical of crypto now, its use by political undesirables could lead to a furtive effort to severely restrict or ban these currencies. We've seen them touching a little bit into the crypto space already. They were trying to push regulations on cryptocurrencies in America's government. So we're already seeing them touch their foot in the water to see how it goes. And if you think that's going to stop, that's not. They're going to eventually get in the water. Let's go to slide 12. Until and unless there is an organized pushback, our future could track with those of increasingly liberal societies. Just last week, the British government announced its own version of a health social credit system. China's system was announced only 7 years ago. Considering the growth of algorithms and dependence on tech giants, the ability to track, censor, and eventually punish ordinary citizens will be mind-boggling by 2030. America's descent into a 21st century gilded age directed by tech titans isn't an inevitability. However, do you know anyone who would take a 5% Amazon coupon in exchange for a call to action? Or someone who would replace their Facebook profile picture to avoid being locked out? Slide 13. The scope of the soft social credit system under construction is enormous. The same companies that can track your activities and give you corporate rewards for compliant behavior could utilize their powers to block transactions, add surcharges, or restrict your use of products. At what point does free speech, be it against biological males playing in girls' sports, questioning vaccine side effects, or advocating for gun rights, make someone a target in this new system? When does your debit card get canceled over old tweets, your home loan denied for homeschooling your kids, or your eBay account invalidated because a friend flagged you for posting a Gadsden flag? This is the utopian society they're going for. And that article was actually published August 3rd, 2021. So 3 years ago almost. So that is going to bring us into a whole nother topic about BRICS. If you've ever heard of BRICS, it's actually a collaboration between Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And those countries are actually still all part of the United Nations, but they have this little subgroup called BRICS. I want to dive into that because this is another economic development that everyone should be watching very closely. It's getting terrifying if you don't already know. BRICS was actually founded in 2009 at a summit by Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and then South Africa didn't join until 2010. Let's look at slide 14. Combined, the BRICS members encompass about 30% of the world's land surface and 45% of the global population. That's a huge amount. We have, for I don't even know how long, a long time, had the dollar as a standard, the US dollar, as a standard for trade worldwide. BRICS has formed, and they're actually trying to get rid of the dollar as the standard. We're going to talk a lot more about that because that's going to significantly impact our economy in the U.S., and it's something everyone should be aware of. So this article talks about Brazil, Russia, India, and China are among the world's 10 largest countries by population area and GDP. They're all part of the G20, which is part of the UN, with a combined nominal GDP of US $28 trillion or 27% of the gross world product. A GDP of around US $57 trillion, which is 33% of the global GDP, and an estimated US $4.5 trillion in combined foreign reserves, and that was as of 2018. That's according to Wikipedia. The intent for BRICS was to create a new global reserve currency. That's one of the main goals. President Putin has already really strongly said he wants to break the US dollar as the standard. It causes the value of the dollar to fall. When the value of the dollar falls, things cost more. We in this country have never fully recovered from COVID and the impact of that on our economy. We have super high inflation. I don't care what they say about unemployment. If you just go and look at LinkedIn a little bit, you can find all these companies that are laying off significant amounts of their workforce, people struggling with posts all over there about how they haven't been employed for 2 years. They're struggling. They can't pay their bills, so on and so forth. You cannot convince me because every day we hear about other large corporations that are doing massive layoffs, particularly in the U.S. So do your own research. Don't listen to the talking heads tell you that the economy is great. It's not. There's something called the New Development Bank. If we can go to slide 15, I want to talk about that a minute. In June 2012, the BRICS nations pledged $75 billion to boost the lending power of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. Now, we talked about that's part of the UN. The IMF is. However, this loan was conditional on IMF voting reforms. In March 2013, during the 5th BRICS summit in Durban, the member countries agreed to create a global financial institution to cooperate with the Western-dominated IMF and World Bank. They planned to set this new development bank up by 2014, but disputes relating to burden sharing and location slowed down the agreements. Okay, so the agreements were there. They wanted to get it in by 2014. This new development bank was going to partner with the World Bank and the IMF and basically take over. It was a global financial institution. So like we have the Federal Reserve, which isn't part of our government. It's an independent organization, but it basically calls the shots on our economy in the U.S. They're talking about a global financial institution. So that's a huge development. Let's go to slide 16. In July 2014, during the 6th BRICS Summit in Fortaleza, the BRICS signed the document to create the U.S. $100 billion new development bank, formerly known as the BRICS Development Bank, and a reserve currency pool worth another U.S. $100 billion. Documents in cooperation between BRICS export credit agencies and an agreement of cooperation on innovation were also inked. Again, they've created a World Bank that they're dealing with. And this new development bank, we need to be following what's going on with it. Let's go to slide 17. According to this, the aim of the latest expansion is touted as part of a plan to build a multipolar world order that puts weight to hitherto subdued voices of the global south and brings them to the center of the world agenda. Listen to this. We're picking up on world order, a world order and world agenda. Tell me that isn't going on. This one world government is already in operation. It's just waiting for all the pieces to fall into place. Slide 18, this is just a picture of the new development bank. It's based in where? Shanghai, China. Slide 19. In 2012, Hu Jintao, the then General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party and President of China, described the BRICS countries as defenders and promoters of developing countries and a force for world peace. Aw, isn't that sweet? Western analysts have highlighted potential divisions and weaknesses in the grouping, et cetera, et cetera. But again, I want to go back to China is supposedly one of our major enemies. They have the largest military in the world. They have a huge population. They own, like we owe them so much debt, it's not even funny. Our national debt basically is owed to China. They're buying farmland all over our country. A lot of it close to military campuses. And so you have to look at the big picture. You can't just take things in pieces and not piece them together and try to see the whole picture. China is not a good player for us, okay? And yet they're the ones that are really running the show with this new development bank. I want to point out something else, and this is related to Bible prophecy. There are currently 5 member countries. There are over 100 that are asking to join. Okay, but there were always the 5 from the beginning. In 2024, there were 6 more that were scheduled to join BRICS. But the new conservative president of Argentina said no. The former liberal president of Argentina had requested to join, so the new president got voted in. He's a very strong conservative and a sovereign person. Believes in sovereignty, and he basically said, I am reneging on the request. I don't want to join. So 5 countries are scheduled to join this year. That's a total of 10 countries. Put up slide 20. I want to tell you that there is, in Bible prophecy, we talked about it at the beginning of this podcast, 10 kings that are empowered by the beast. Okay? There are 10 countries this year that will be members of BRICS. And I think that's very intriguing because there were supposed to be 11. Argentina pulled out. We talked about the Bible prophecy in Revelation earlier at the beginning of the podcast, talking about the 10 kings in Revelation 17. Being powered by the beast. And don't you find it ironic that BRICS has 10 member countries as of this year. I just find that interesting. It could be that more join. It could be that some drop out. I don't know. I don't know if that's truly the 10 kings, but I just find that really interesting because if you look at our financial state in the U.S., it's really not good. It's very bleak. I saw some financial analysts calling for some major changes in March and April of this year to our dollar and our economy, because China just dumped $6 billion, I think, of debt of ours. And that was just a piece of the pie. And these financial analysts stated that if China had dumped all our debt at once, it would kill our dollar. If you look at Argentina or Venezuela's demise, it didn't take very long. And it was due to inflation and oil. A lot of it. Right now, our debt's over $34 trillion, mostly indebted to China. The inflation rate was the largest in recent history in June of 2022, and it's gone down a little bit, but the overall trajectory is still rising. We have slide 21. This is the annual inflation rate from 2010 to present. And I want you to look on the right side and notice all those huge spikes. And we saw it come down a little bit in 23 and 2024. But I want you to notice the blue line from left to right. That's the linear regression trend line. It's on a trajectory to continue to go up regardless. That's according to what is the current U.S. inflation rate at inflationdata.com. I want to talk a little bit about why does inflation matter? So per that article, they state since high inflation is detrimental to the overall economy but beneficial to the government since it allows them to pay back their debt with cheaper dollars, the Federal Reserve has a constant balancing act to try to reconcile the government's desires for higher inflation with the need for a healthy economy. In the article, they go on to say their major argument revolves around the stimulating efforts of inflation. Basically, it makes people feel richer until they eventually realize that each of their dollars now buys less. And we're experiencing that now. Nothing in government happens overnight, by the way. If you're not following what the laws are, either nationally or locally, and I'm going to stress locally, you should be, because whatever laws go into place, they usually don't take effect till the following year. You may not see the impact of those laws for 2 to 3 years. So I have seen it during my lifetime over and over again, people complaining about my property taxes. I just got a new bill and it's up $500 this month from what it was. Well, guess what? That's because there was a local referendum on the ballot in the little election, not the major election, but the little election, right? And the dummies in the neighborhood voted yes on the property tax increase for the schools. I mean, if you are not paying attention to this kind of stuff, you're going to be caught off guard. And I feel like that's what's happening now. A lot of people are complaining about the economy. Well, guess what? Those who followed it, like us, knew years ago what was going to happen. And that's another thing that I find so funny is like we're called conspiracy theorists until it happens. And usually, again, that might take 2 to 3 years. And I don't know about you, but I look at these people and go, duh, we knew that. We were trying to say that 3 years ago, but you had to learn the hard way, right? It's like a parent with a kid. They act like they're all that and elitist and they know everything, when in actuality, they have to learn the hard way because they won't listen to reason. Okay, so this whole situation with inflation, it's making people think they have money until they realize that they don't. This results in people buying things they wouldn't normally have had they realized that their money was actually worth less than they thought. Eventually, it results in what's called monetary hangover as the effects of their buying binge becomes apparent. So with inflation, you think you have a lot more than you do because it looks like you do, but those dollars are worth less, essentially. So people, if you have $10 bills and you think you have $10, you're going to spend it differently than if you have $10 bills that are actually worth 80 cents each, right? You can still have the dollar bill physically. It's just worth a lot less. So, but it's tricky with people because our minds are focused on the physical, right? So our minds are focused on, but I have $10. And to get people to understand, you really don't. You've got 80 cents on every dollar. They don't often see it until it's much later. The dollar becomes more and more worthless as inflation rises and or stays high, and that's part of the de-dollarization activity that I believe is intentional. The World Economic Forum is supporting a central bank digital currency. Let's go to slide 22. This is just to show you that this is an article or a publication right off the World Economic Forum's website. They're pushing it and they're providing a toolkit to people to implement it. Then let's go to slide 23, again off the WEF's website directly. This is from December of 2022, and it's talking about the U.S. position. Consumers won't be using digital dollars right away. Although President Biden issued an executive order on the responsible development of digital assets in March, and this is 2022, and the White House in September 2022 released a comprehensive framework for the development of a central bank digital currency, the government is still studying the issue. I know they did a pilot for this. They were working on a pilot. And typically when the government does a pilot, they never say, we changed our mind, we're not going to do it. They've invested money in it. They do the pilot. It doesn't seem to matter what the outcome was. They're pushing forward with it. Let's go back to that slide. If the U.S. does move ahead, this form of currency probably won't be put into wider use for several years. Remember I said they make decisions in government. You don't see the outcome of it for a couple, 3 years. The very limited 12-week pilot involving the Federal Reserve Bank in New York will be rolled out soon using simulated digital tokens and data. Again, this was 2022. Slide 24. China is the first country to issue its own digital currency. So they already have it. It's moving to displace the dollar as the central currency being used for international transactions. I can tell you that BRICS has now, like all the countries have agreed not to use the dollar in trade. They're using their local currencies right now. They haven't decided on a standard across all the BRICS countries, but they're currently using their own local currencies for trade and allowing each other to do that. That is devaluing our dollar every day. This says currently there are about 11 countries that have launched digital currencies. Did you know that? There are 15 that are piloting them. There are 26 that have them in development and 45 countries that are studying the issue. And 19 out of the 20 G20 countries, again, UN countries, are exploring a central bank digital currency. So basically, the United States has no option but to consider a digital dollar. If we don't have a digital dollar and other central bank currencies take off, particularly with the Chinese yuan, which is one of the ones BRICS was considering making a standard, the dollar will definitely lose its supremacy in international settlements. The status as the dominant reserve currency offers many advantages to the U.S., apart from global prestige and an acknowledgement of its political and economic stability. It allows the U.S. to borrow money abroad at a lower cost, and it gives power to impose sanctions by cutting off the ability to transact in dollars. Okay, so the reverse of that is we lose the dollar as the standard. We no longer can borrow money abroad at a lower cost. So it's going to cost us more to borrow, which in the state we're in, we're going to have to continue to do. And the other thing is we won't be able to impose sanctions on other countries and get compliance from extremist rulers and extremist countries. So that takes away a lot of our security. Also, on that same note, privacy is of a huge concern. There's no anonymity on the digital dollars that the countries are coming up with. I know with Bitcoin there is anonymous ownership, but with these ones that these countries are coming up with, there is no privacy. It's not anonymous at all. And of course, cyber attacks could be an issue. What has the government ever done right? Or well, should I say, except the DMV. The Department of Motor Vehicles did a major overhaul in Indiana a few years ago, and it was noticeably better. But typically, the government just doesn't run things well, so there's that. There's also an issue with crypto if you don't have any internet access or electronic access. So it's not a physical thing, it's an electronic thing. Therefore, you need Wi-Fi and electronic access to use it. There's a lot of talk about cyber attacks. I know Yemen was issuing warnings to the U.S. that if we didn't stop the bombings over near there, that we would wreak the worst havoc upon us that we've ever seen. And their intention was around cyber attacks and knocking out our power grid. There's that. Then also the U.S. government would have oversight to prevent crimes that could occur through this type of tender, and that's what they're focused on. That's their push for it. But what if there's a world government? If there's a world government and a world digital currency, how does that work? And then consider the social credit scores and a digital currency. So, for example, in China, right now, it's happening. Again, if you use too many carbon credits, your money could be shut off. We saw that happen with the Canadian truckers, where the Canadian government stepped in and froze all their assets, and they had no access to their money. It's too easy to do. I mean, it could happen with our current banking system too. So there's that. But if you're on a digital currency and you have the social credit scores, the implications are a lot bigger. Follow their social edicts, then your money could be shut off. Essentially, I didn't understand when I was young and I studied Bible prophecy. I couldn't make the connection between like a world government. Why is that so bad? Like if you get a chip in your hand, why is that going to send you to hell? And you have no way of getting out of that punishment. It didn't make any sense to me. I have come to the realization that all of this is because it makes the government God. It makes the government the ruler and the one that gives you rights, right? In our Constitution, in our Bill of Rights, we say our rights are given to us by our Creator and they cannot be taken from us. We've endowed rights that are given by God. If in these kind of utopian situations, I'm going to say dystopian situations with these government rules and these social credit scores, and they control your money and it's all digital, and they can shut you off and they can tell you can't travel and you can't fly on a plane and you can't do this because you were a bad kid. It puts the government in a position of being God, and that's who you answer to. And it takes God's authority away and puts it in man's hands. That's why it's bad. So I'm going to close up and talk to kind of close out this whole discussion. I'm pretty sure you can see now from what we've gone over, all these weird connections that the media doesn't tell you about. It takes somebody doing investigative work to track it all down. And I haven't even touched the surface. So I'm not saying I'm an expert in anything. I just spent some time on it. Our financial systems are all very volatile across the world right now. We're moving towards a point where economies are not going to succeed. They're going to fail. And something has to happen. So the law of natural occurrences would say that we're on a downward trajectory economically worldwide. Some catastrophe has to happen to reset it, to continue, right? And I think you can see from the formation of BRICS and where that's at this year, all of a sudden 5 more countries are going to be joining it. So a total of 10. We align that with Bible prophecy. We align it with the economy. We align it with the UN and their hands being in literally everything. I mean, this week we talked about economic globalism and the World Economic Forum and BRICS and things like that. The next episode, we're going to talk about their hand being in the healthcare and environment. So the World Health Organization arm and how that's working throughout the world, and the pandemic treaty that's coming soon and what that means. But they just have literally inserted themselves into everything, including the gender ideology stuff, which is a soft skill. That's the other thing I don't understand. Like, I could see a government being involved in tangible things, but when it comes to values-based things or emotion-based things, why does the government have any business in that whatsoever? They have no business in it, but you're going to hear mental health. That's a whole push right now. I agree that we have mental health issues. I agree that we need to address them, but I'm going to show you next week how they're being used, how the UN is using mental health to bring about some things that you wouldn't expect. And again, talking about Venezuela from an economic standpoint, it only took a few years for them to become the most affluent country in South America to a devastated country that is broke. I'm just going to say it, broke. In Brazil, so I studied Brazilian Portuguese for 2 years in high school, and I've always had an affinity for Brazil. And the reason I bring that up is because, a couple years ago, they had a conservative president in Brazil who really changed things around, the economy and the crime rate. And Sao Paulo is the third largest city on the continent. I've looked at videos about it and pictures on Google, and they have a Lamborghini shop downtown, and they have, a lot of urban development, large companies that are based there, like Microsoft and the place I used to work for. So they're very, very established in Sao Paulo in particular. That's where I'm talking about. And so I wanted to go until we had planned on going last year. In the fall of the year before, they had a new election, and I kept thinking, there's no way this president is going to lose in Brazil. He has turned the economy around. He's turned the crime around. He's a conservative. He was friends with President Trump. Keep that in mind. Very good friends. And so I was all excited to go. And I'm telling you, like, we could go for 2 weeks on $2,000, $1,000 a piece. And that's flight and hotel included, because the economy is so much cheaper there than it is here. And that's staying in 4- and 5-star hotels. So I was all excited. And then they had the election. And ironically, the conservative president who's turned everything around lost to the liberal president. And there was a huge uproar at the Capitol there. Sound familiar? People stormed the Capitol. Only in Brazil, they stormed the Capitol with weapons. And they weren't messing around. They meant business. It turns out that the liberal president tried to blame the conservative president, who happened to be in Florida. So that wasn't going to work. He wasn't even there. But talk about the irony of the identical thing happening there that happened here on January 6th. And the fact that a president here won that I do not believe legitimately won. A president there won that it made no logical sense that he won. And then having them in BRICS with China and Russia and India and South Africa. I'm seeing all the writing on the wall, and I'm saying all that to say this. I've followed Brazil. I've watched videos about it. I happened upon one where the focus was on travel, and they were highlighting the fact that Venezuela and Brazil border each other, and the Venezuelan economy was so bad that people made the equivalent of $1 a week, and a hot dog stand charged $4 for a hot dog. So that's how bad it was. So the Venezuelans were coming into Brazil to buy stuff, and then they go back to Venezuela at night. They'd come over for the day across the border. And then it got to the point where they just stopped going back. They stayed in Brazil and just put up camps, and the Brazilians were not happy about it. They didn't want them there. That tells you a little bit about the state of Venezuela, and I believe that we are on the cusp of the same thing. It can happen quickly and very drastically, and if you don't know, look it up. Anyways, going on, there's actually an article you can look it up in. It talks about Venezuela, how socialism, hyperinflation affected the economic collapse. We have hyperinflation that's coming. We have socialism behind the scenes. We talked about that with the communist goals. And we talked about the difference between the socialism and communism. It's not very different. Socialism is a step on the way to communism. So that is part of what led to Venezuela's demise. And we see the same thing kind of happening here on a slower scale, but still. So we are sending significant amounts of money to Ukraine, Israel, Gaza. We're funding wars. We didn't have wars in the last administration. Just going to say that. But we have them now, 3 at least going on. We have an open border where people from third world countries are coming over. And I can tell you that can go one of two ways. You can either have people coming over from third world countries that are used to gangs in the streets and violence and crime and poverty, and they can come here and not want this country to be like that and end up fighting for that. You can also have people like that who come here who are used to that and want to make it like that here. And the problem is you don't know who's what. So it's just a big issue with them flooding the border. And then the world moving to digital currency and leaving us behind. And U.S. is going to have to catch up with that. Moving away from our dollar as a standard. We have leaders in our country that declared their allegiance to globalism and to socialism and communism. It's totally moving in a direction of a one world government. And it's been doing that for a long time. So let's end on what can we do? There's not much. There's not a whole lot we can do. People like you and me. One thing we can do is the elections. You need to be looking at people's policies and what they stand for. And I want you to look at the candidates and think of it through the lens of who's for America and who's not. We have so many people that sit on the sidelines and don't go to the polls to vote. I've heard every excuse in the book, and I can tell you in my lifetime, I've had some struggles. I was a single mom for a lot of years. I was facing being homeless. I've had a lot of things that got in the way of voting. But since I became an avid voter, the polls, even if you go on voting day, the polls open at 6 a.m. and they close at 6 p.m. And some of the excuses I hear is, well, I have to work. So you're telling me you work 12-hour days? It's possible. Are you telling me you work 12-hour days and you don't have a break at all? Maybe. Are you telling me you have a supervisor who, if you were a few minutes late back from lunch, because the line was long at the poll, they wouldn't excuse it? That is a possibility, but I think you could fight that. There's also early voting. I don't understand people's excuses for not going to the polls. I've been able to do it every time, and I don't understand it. I think it's just an excuse. So get yourselves out to the polls and vote. Another thing you can do is follow the bills in legislature, and that means local and national. National is something that I followed for a long time, didn't really follow local, but I'm beginning to follow that even more so because the local level is the grassroots level. The local level is where you have the most impact. You may not have a lot of impact on the national level, but at your local level, you do. Your vote counts for more than it does at the national level. I can tell you that much. So get to know the people that are running. I'm telling you, do not be beholden to a party, because you got the same people on both sides in a lot of cases, and we're facing this uniparty thing. So find good candidates, and if you don't have good candidates, consider running yourself. definitely do that. Make a phone call to your reps. When there's a bill you agree with, don't agree with, whatever, make a simple phone call. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of a gamer on my phone, and I spend a lot of time just playing games. Or, I don't want to make a phone call because I'm going to be on there for an hour and I don't want to be restricted for an hour. Things like that. But it is a very quick phone call to make to your reps. It doesn't take much. Also, find a local group to stay informed. And if you don't have one, think about starting one so that you can follow things like this and definitely stay ahead of what's going on. And the last thing is pray. Pray, pray, pray. Because prayer works and we need a lot of it. So in future shows, we're going to continue on with the UN for a little bit and talking about our current culture. We're going to talk about healthcare next with the World Health Organization. We're going to talk about the mental health that they're pushing, the gender ideology they're pushing. We're also going to cover the war on children and on parents, things like farming and climate change and more. So stay tuned for more shows. If you like the content, be sure to subscribe, click the notification bell, and share. And be sure to drop a comment because that helps with the algorithms. And in the very last thing I want to do is give a huge shout out to Revolver Broadcasting. Josh, you're the bomb. Thanks for producing the show. And go to revolverbroadcasting.com and check out the other shows that are available. And with that, I'm going to wish you all a good night. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. And don't forget to leave a comment. Bye.